Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric series on some of my favorite beat 'em up games of all time. If you can't tell already, today we're playing Golden Axe or Revenge of Death Adder. And weirdly enough, I haven't talked about this game in over 4 years on the channel. The last time I made a video about it was 2021 and time has absolutely just flown by. And honestly, Golden Axe or Revenge of Death Adder is one of Sega's best beat 'em ups and also one of its most neglected properties. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we have a Patreon link down below as well. But honestly, by this point in time, if you haven't played Golden Axe the Revenge of Death Adder, you're 100% missing out. I'm assuming most people have. It's just absolutely quintessentially one of Sega's best beat 'em up games, and it is one of my favorite System 32 games of all time as well. And it's one of those games I hope one day to see a core on MiSTer FPGA, because it's just Sega at its best, making an awesome sprite scaling beat 'em up and not really utilizing the sprite scaling too much, just giving you a little taste here and there. Golden Axe has always been a franchise I grew up with. I remember seeing the original in arcades, and when I got my Sega Genesis for Christmas one year, I did get a copy of Golden Axe either that same day or pretty close after. I can't remember because obviously it has been more than a minute. But this is just the type of title that shows just how good Sega was in the 32-bit era. From the combat, to the music, to the sprites, to the sprite scaling, to the overall gameplay and concept, it just 100% hits, and I do love these small sprite scaling areas as well, and how the artist showed restraint in using that scaling. They didn't throw it in everywhere they needed it, they just kind of sparingly used it for a nice effect. And honestly, this title is one of those games that is still neglected to this day. Yes, it finally did come over to the Astro City Mini, but it's one of those titles from Sega, they basically pretend for the most part it doesn't exist. I understand during the Sega Saturn era, all the rage was 3D, and not many publishers wanted to put out 2D games, including Sega, because they didn't think that's where the market was going after the hardware released. But the fact that this did not get a Sega Saturn port is one of the absolute biggest travesties in my opinion. We got Golden Axe the Duel on Sega Saturn, but the fact that the Revenge of Death Adder did not come over is just absolutely one of those instances where I feel like Sega had a big miss. This game has so many different characters, so many different branching pathways, and honestly it always felt like it was intended to be a home console release, because from start to finish this game takes approximately an hour to beat, which is about double the length of your standard arcade beat 'em up. And even though this is never going to rival Streets of Rage 2 for my favorite Sega beat 'em up of all time, it is very high up on the list. I absolutely love the sprite animations, the stagger effects. There's so many frames in each animation, it just 100% feels like a living, breathing game. And all of your animal buddies here, for lack of a better term, I know that's Donkey Kong, but it's what I think of them as, have so many different move sets: electric scorpions, fire-breathing bone dragons, electrical praying mantis. There's just so many different mounts that you can grab in this game, and I always love that Dora here actually ends up getting legs when she comes on a mount. She goes from a half horse, half woman to a full woman on top of an animal, and it's a really creative way to basically make that sprite animation transform in the proper aspect. And it's one of those things with this game, there's so many enemies on screen at once, all of the magical effects here, the power-ups just look incredible. There really isn't anything that Death Adder does wrong outside of maybe reusing the bosses a bit too much towards the back quarter of the game, but that's pretty much synonymous with any sort of beat 'em up out there. There's always almost a boss rush at the end, or reuse of some characters when you get to the late stages. But I love all of the enemy designs here as well. These mass tribesmen, all of the different skeletons with shields, the actual barbarians, kind of feels a little bit like a cross between Conan the Barbarian and Army of Darkness. And if you can make those two movies into one, please do. I would love to watch that. And it also makes me think, when are we ever going to get another Conan the Barbarian movie? Sure, Arnold Schwarzenegger's old at this point in time, but make him old Conan and basically have him running his kingdom. It's always something I've wanted to see. And honestly, every time I play Golden Axe, that is the franchise I'm reminded of, the same way when I play Rust Saga 3. Golden Axe the Revenge of Death Adder is just one of those games. It's an absolute stone cold classic, and if you've never played it before, you absolutely have to. And the soundtrack, pure Sega classic. Listen, and I'll be right back. Just some straight up awesome music, and if you listen closely throughout the game, you're going to hear a lot of the Wilhelm scream in there, and if you're not aware what that is, definitely Google it. It's a classic scream from cinema that gets used in a ton of video games as well, and Sega was no different here. And I love this pseudo real-time lighting effect when you actually hit the boss's armor, and those sparks actually produce light in the background. It's a really nice touch, and that's what Sega System 32 was all about. It was a 32-bit 2D system, basically meant just to display as many sprites, colors, and animations on screen as possible, with also having really good sprite scaling. It's one of those things. I feel like the System 32 was what Sega Saturn was supposed to be before they added all the 3D capabilities in. And of course, Sega initially designed the Sega Saturn as just a pure 2D system because they thought the 32-bit generation was just going to be about games that looked like this, but the industry went in a different direction. 3D came home and Sega pivoted, making it a powerhouse for both 2D and a decent 3D machine. And it always felt like the Revenge of Death Adder was supposed to be maybe a launch game for the Sega Saturn, and it's so disappointing that we never got a physical copy home port. And trust me, if you want to buy an arcade board for this game, bring your wallet. It's going to be the 4-digit mark. I do think it's worth it, but it's one of those things with emulation working so well, it really is just for the collectors out there. Now, as far as the characters are concerned, Trix here, probably my least favorite. The fastest, but doesn't do a whole lot of damage, and his magic attack is actually just producing a fruit tree, so you can eat apples and regain your strength, which is a very fun kind of mechanic, but honestly, just never been a character that clicked for me. Goa here is just my number one. He's got the best magical attack. He's got those heavy hits. Sure, he's a little bit slower, but it really does feel like I'm just fighting as a massive barbarian, destroying the armies of Death Adder as I go to the final fight. And with that ore ship just breaching the hull and basically scaling in real time, I just absolutely love it. And I do love how dumb some of the enemies are, just literally charging to their deaths, getting eaten by the Kraken there. But as we go through the interior of this ship, some of the art design in this is just absolutely amazing. And of course, Sega was known for their bright colors, and you're going to get some of those here like on the mask of the tribesman, but I love that they went with a solid wood color and really kind of kept the colors to a minimum in the Revenge of Death Adder. You get just enough color to know it is Sega design, but they don't go so over the top that it feels quote-unquote cartoony. I've always loved the art style of Golden Axe, and honestly, the Revenge of Death Adder I think has the best colorways, color profile, and otherwise vibe of any of the games in the franchise. But you tell me down below, of all of the Golden Axe games, which one is your favorite? I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of different answers there. We even get an Indiana Jones moment with rolling boulders, but it's pretty much a free attempt. If you just go all the way to the left or the right, you're going to be safe. And this bone dragon right here that spits out fireballs, probably my favorite mount in the entire game. But that is the fun of this title. There's something for everyone, and I love to see this golden hour sunset battle here with all of the different mounds of corpses in the background, with both swords and crosses demarcating where they have died. You can tell an epic battle took place here. But one more soundtrack sample, because again, I love the music in Death Adder. We're going to do 30 seconds. I'll be right back with just a little bit more. Now, if there was one other quote-unquote criticism I could level against this game, aside of the fact that it reuses a few too many of the bosses later on, is it could use maybe one or two more musical tracks. All the music here is great, but you're going to hear the same 3 or 4 tracks repeated throughout the game, so it feels like maybe had they just kind of doubled up on the overall soundtrack, it would have been to the game's benefit. Now, the Revenge of Death Adder is not a perfect game. It's like a 9.5 out of 10. There's definitely a few areas where I think it could be improved, like I said, the soundtrack and the reuse of the boss battles. But outside of that, the animations, the gameplay, all of the different vibes you get here, the special attacks where you basically turn your opponents into stone in close-up, it just 100% hits, and it still boggles my mind to this day that Sega basically does not make this game available many places whatsoever. You can emulate it, it's perfect, and it's free, or you can buy a Sega Astro City Mini and you're going to have the game on there as well. It seems like one of those things. I know Yakuza keeps adding 3D games to the overall arcade, but go ahead and pop this one on. I'll be very happy. But that's the video. Definitely leave me a comment down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.